Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining us today for this webinar. I'm David Shaw, the Publishing Director for Family Business Magazine, and I hope that you and your family members are all well. Today's webinar will look at ways to modernize your shareholder communications and management systems. So administrative tasks pile up, processes break down, and governance structures strain, often at the worst possible times, and your shareholders aren't happy. So this session is going to offer some real takeaways on how to solve that. Before we get started, however, if you haven't joined us before, we welcome your questions and comments throughout. You just hit the ask a question bar down below the slide there that you see. And we're going to go for no more than 30 minutes today. This is one of our Friday lunch and learns. So let's introduce our speaker here. Joining me today for this discussion is Graham McConnell, who's the CEO and co-founder of Nth Round, a platform that helps private companies simplify equity management and strengthen shareholder relationships. He spent the last years working alongside family business and private ownership groups to bring more transparency, alignment, and connection to complex ownership structures. So welcome, Graham. It's really great to have you with us. And I'm going to turn this over to you, and you're in charge of the slides.
Great.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, David. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. As David mentioned, my name is Graham McConnell. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Nth Round. In short, we do shareholder portals, but there's a lot behind the scenes that we do with private company governance. As I mentioned, I'm the co-founder, so my dad is actually my co-founder, which is great. We are ourselves a family business. And we were lucky, or we consider ourselves very lucky, to have worked with family businesses early in our company history. We've only been around since 2018, but we've been very customer driven, getting to learn alongside these multi-generational family businesses about their challenges with managing shareholders, communicating, and one of the things that we've come to really appreciate and focus on so much is creating a really engaging shareholder experience. So yes, for shareholders, there is lots to see and do, but behind the scenes, someone within the company is kind of managing all of this, whether that's one person or multiple people. So that kind of leads me to the topic of today's webinar, which is kind of learning some of the lessons that we've seen companies learn about modernizing their shareholder relations function. And we've heard so many times these administrators say, I wish we had done this years ago. Why did it take us so long to do this? And so we kind of decided, let's take a step back and look at some of the indicators that led them to kind of deciding to modernize things. So I'm going to start with some of the signals, and then I'll talk about some inflection points. And then lastly, some strategies that were employed by the companies that we've been lucky enough to work alongside. So starting with the signals, this is kind of in jest, but there are real stressors that fall on the shoulders of whoever is doing this within the company. We had an admin tell us that she used to stay up all night the night before a dividend payment went out, and it's understandable. I mean, the bar is really high for getting these things right the first time. Going back and trying to fix an error like that is incredibly challenging. And it doesn't just apply to dividends. It's proxy votes, it's reporting and notices, getting agreements signed, board meetings, shareholder meetings. It's a lot, that falls on one person generally. The next signal that we often see is an inbox that looks like this. Mail merge is actually a really useful tool for some of these infrequent processes that take place with shareholders. So, let's say a redemption is taking place, or a buyback window, or a vote is going on. Mail merge is great, and it inevitably looks like this for the admin, and so just being able to kind of consolidate these responses becomes pretty challenging. Next up, spreadsheets that look like this. Spreadsheets are great. We love spreadsheets, but they always tend to get more complex over time, and we've seen incredibly complex spreadsheets that we're kind of tasked with modernizing or kind of putting a framework in place for them. Obviously, you want a single source of truth for the cap table and who owns what, but inevitably you're going to end up with multiple versions of that cap table, and often with good reason. So year end or quarter end, you want a snapshot of who owns what. Dividend declarations is another, really important date where you need to make sure that everything is accurate on that data record. You want to store that somewhere, memorialize it, but you also need kind of the active source of truth. So spreadsheets can become overwhelming. That's another indicator. Desktops that look like this. If your desktop looks like this, I want to tell you about a concept called folders. But in reality, K1 season can get really complicated. Yes, there can be a lot of documents, but figuring out kind of who should receive what gets more and more complicated as time goes on. So you've got advisors, accountants, custodians. As the kind of estate planning journey goes on, you need to remember that it's not always a one-to-one ratio between documents and persons. That can get unwieldy. And then lastly, if your phone looks like this, my phone looks like this, so maybe I shouldn't judge, but shareholders will use every mode of communication that's available to them to get in touch with the company. And as you can imagine, it's hard to keep track of those various modes of communication. So kind of in summary, there's some of the signals that we come across as, problems are starting to bubble up, not quite reaching a boiling point maybe, but over-reliance on a single administrator. If crafting an out-of-office, auto reply starts to feel really impossible or challenging because it's got to go to 5 different people, that's definitely an indicator. Shareholder friction, if you're hearing things like, how much do I own? Where is my dividend check? And if that's starting to take days to resolve, if you feel like you're not being quite as responsive as you would like to be with shareholders, that's another signal to look for. Spreadsheet fragility, I kind of touched on this, but managing multiple tabs or workbooks, several versions of a spreadsheet, if that starts to make answering even basic questions about ownership challenging, that's definitely an indicator. Participation drop-off, proxy voting, or even any kind of communication where you are expecting a reply from shareholders or input from shareholders. If it feels like you're starting to have to pull teeth, then that's definitely a sign that might be time to start looking at ways to make that more engaging for shareholders. Disjointed communication, as I mentioned, calls, emails, text messages, paper mailings, if that starts to feel burdensome. And then lastly, compliance blind spots, missing historical records or inconsistent data that leaves you kind of scrambling during audits or during board reviews. That last minute panic is definitely a sign that your system maybe isn't quite as reliable as you would like it to be. If we think about some of the inflection points that kind of get you to that, or that are the boiling point, the proverbial straw that breaks the camel's back, tax season is one definitely where it happens once a year, or hopefully once a year, maybe twice a year, depending on how you're reporting. But that kind of reveals some of the stressors or the pain points that come up with governance. K1 distribution that takes weeks, errors that ripple, have a ripple effect and lead to frustrated shareholders or strained accountants. Proxy voting headaches, reaching a quorum is, if that feels really challenging, chasing signatures, and you might be blind to, where things are. That's definitely an inflection point that we've seen. Dividends, talked a little bit about, making sure that you have the right cap table on that date of record. We've had a client even tell us that they were running into issues with check fraud. Maybe it's not always that serious, but like tracking when checks are being cashed. We definitely have clients that spend an inordinate amount of time tracking what's been cashed and what hasn't, and why hasn't this one person cashed that check in 2 months? Did they get that check or not? That can definitely be an inflection point. And then ownership transitions kind of goes hand in hand with trust and estate complexity. Making sure that you have all of the accounts, a relationship between people and the accounts that they kind of oversee, that can start to kind of really complicate things to a point where companies say, let's do something about this. It's also hard to prioritize something that only happens once or twice a year. You kind of feel like you have to relearn it every time. And again, the expectation is that no mistakes will be made. The bar is very high. So these are the kinds of things where, in our experience, we've seen companies say, let's take a step back and let's think about a way to kind of modernize our process here. So the shift that we see companies take, we covered the signals, we covered the inflection points, and then so what is it that companies do at this point? Primarily it's a change of mindset, but first, obviously, you have to identify the issues. Where are the bottlenecks? What's most painful or causing the most stress? Second, fix it, and that's much easier said than done. But coming up with a plan for how are we going to modernize these processes? And you're probably going to find a couple of other problems along the way. But identifying the issues, fixing them, and then lastly, and probably most importantly, is prevention. Finding systems that are future-proof, that are built to grow with your company, and as governance gets more complicated, that's really the mindset that we see leading families taking when it comes to to modernizing their governance. If it's a process that's painful, no matter how many times you do it, that's really ripe for modernization. And we maybe as software developers see the whole world in terms of what's a really repeatable, automatable process. Whereas there are other things where, maybe it's just painful once, and then you can do it for every shareholder pretty easily after that. And so those are more manageable. But the ones where it's like, every time we do this is painful. Those are the kinds of things you really want to focus on fixing and preventing. So I want to talk a little bit more concretely about specific clients that we've worked with, starting with one that has been around for, I think, 115 years at this point. And they were relying really heavily on paper mailings. Along with that, they were using a lot of physical stock certificates. So they still, to this day, have a typewriter in the office that's meant to fill out stock certificates. They have an embosser in the office to, again, fill out these certificates and mail them. Everything is also going through one administrator, and that one administrator is also chief legal. So not only is it kind of all going through one person, but it's a really expensive resource for everything to be going through. The other thing about them is they were using Microsoft Access. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Microsoft Access, but I believe it was created in the early 90s. It's probably older than I am. And at the time, I have to give them credit. It probably was a really good decision to say, hey, let's create a database to manage all of this. But it's gotten to the point, or had gotten to the point, where it was so antiquated that things started breaking and they didn't know how to fix them, basically. And it's a little bit like tech debt, if you're familiar with that concept. It's a snowball effect. By the point they got to the inflection, there are reports being run for tax, for accounting, for treasury, for legal, and the concept of trying to change that system became so daunting that it was almost, it seemed impossible, basically. So,
Graham,
so that was kind of the point.
Graham, did you say tech debt?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Can you explain?
Maybe it's a more niche term than I thought, but tech debt is basically like if you have a long backlog of work to be done, essentially, or it has a cascading effect. Trying to think of a concrete example. If you use what's a really old piece of software? I can't think of a great example off the top of my head, but if you become too reliant on an antiquated piece of software, that's kind of known as tech debt, because you're going to have to dig yourself out of that hole at some point to move forward. I don't know if that helps at all.
It does. I was going to suggest Lotus 123, any of a variety of very ancient programs.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So really where this became apparent to them was during tax season and proxy voting. Those were the points where we're starting to create a lot of frustration. The administrator felt like she couldn't go on vacation, especially not during those important periods. And it ended up in delays, essentially. So a lot of manual effort in tracking the progress of proxy voting, getting K1s out, and it ended up eroding trust a little bit, honestly, both for the administrator and for the shareholders. They kind of lost confidence, which is a shame, because the company should be focused on their core business, right? Like, it's not their job to be managing the family. I mean, at least not full time, right? Yeah, I mean, it was important to them that they professionalize their shareholder-facing functions, because it's so key to building trust with the family, essentially. So they shifted. They found their biggest bottlenecks, their most painful workflows, and identified single points of failure, and they were able to build a much more scalable solution that's, like I was saying, like much more future-proof and grows as the family grows. So that's one example. And I wish I could use names here, but I need to be respectful of these families. So one other example that I'll give, again, this is a multi-generational family, century-old business, and they were doing buybacks entirely through paper. Well, actually, sorry, they were doing paper and email, because inevitably there will be some shareholders that don't even have an email address. So they were kind of trying to aggregate responses through email and through physical mail, and requests started slipping through the cracks. And you can imagine that a shareholder would be upset that their buyback request wasn't received. And fixing something like that is very painful. So yeah, the signals were requests coming from every direction, and they were having to chase people for responses on this buyback. Became a huge cat herding effort, essentially. The breaking point was at year end, which is the time when time and accuracy are most important. The process ended up stretching into months, which really was just untenable for them. Administrators were exhausted, shareholders were frustrated, and so they made a shift. They were able to kind of streamline everything into a single unified platform. Requests are now submitted and organized in one place, whether no matter what the mode of communication is. And so now they have a much more clear and unified process, to manage buybacks, which is great. Definitely much more repeatable for them. So now that we've kind of been through a couple of examples, I just want to spend a minute talking about what are some practical strategies that you can apply today. I should acknowledge that I don't think I've met a single shareholder administrator who's not incredibly busy and just can't get their head above water to kind of step back. But I encourage you, even if it's just on this webinar, to think about what are the processes that have caused the most pain and stress over the last year. And so I think one strategy that's a great one to take is a stress test. It may sound a little extreme, but let's just imagine that the lead administrator retires unexpectedly. What breaks when that happens? Is there someone that backs them up and can pick up that process without issue? You could even have that person, sit on the sidelines and say, these one or two other people are going to manage our proxy vote this year. And yes, that person will be there and can step in if problems arise. But I think that this is really helpful in understanding documentation shortcomings. Is there a process that can be picked up by someone else? So that's the first one. Auditing your spreadsheets, I think, is always a good idea. How many versions exist and how many should exist? Who controls them? Mapping shareholder questions or categorizing them, I think, is really great. It's one thing to answer a one-off question of someone saying, I lost my K1, where is it? It's another thing to get a question like, what's the dividend strategy next year? That's a much more complicated question to answer. And if you're noticing trends, let's look back at the last few months of calls and emails that you got from shareholders. Are there trends that you can pick up on? Are there categories of questions? And can you create a communications plan so that you're delivering a consistent message to shareholders? Look at your communication cadence as well. So are there regular communications quarterly or annually, monthly? And are they clear and consistent? So basically looking at the regular communications that go out to everyone, and then also the one-offs that are kind of inbound rather than outbound. Start small. I think it can seem very daunting to try and do a full digital transformation all at once. I would say look for low-hanging fruit, for quick wins, and focus on those. I think it's encouraging to get some quick wins out of the way. It doesn't need to be an overhaul all at once. So, and last thing I'll say is, there are platforms out there. Obviously, we are one of them, but there are others. If the major pain point is, securely transmitting documents to the right people, there are platforms out there that can do that at very low cost, very low effort. Look at what tools are out there to help make your life easier. So with that, I think I want to pause and see if any questions have come in. David, maybe you can help me check that.
Certainly. So just a question on, you mentioned that one case of the chief legal officer sort of being in charge of doing all of this. Who do you commonly find managing shareholder, all of these things in the families that you deal with? What role?
I think it tends to be tax or legal. It really also depends quite a bit on how big the business is. As things really get complex with really big families, then you'll have a full-time shareholder admin, or you'll have an embedded family office. And that's when there's, that's quite a big role. That there's a lot of complexity when there's a whole separate department to help manage shareholders. But I'd say in the earlier days, it usually falls on tax or legal. Yeah.
Okay. What about AI? So where does it's on everybody's minds these days. But if you have a system, if you finally get your system working, will AI, how does AI help with shareholder, all of these areas, distributions, tracking, et cetera? Have you explored that?
Yeah. So one challenge with AI, which is true, I think, across the board, but definitely when it comes to shareholder management, there's probably no information more sensitive than your shareholder data. So, before you want to make sure that if you are going to utilize an AI platform, that you're doing it with at the very least anonymized data, but hopefully you can do it without any actual data itself. And like we've gone through this, internally, we've been presented with challenges where I think it's ripe for AI to say, I'll give you a concrete example actually. Basis tracking. Especially for an S corp, that can get really, really complicated. You have to look at basically like a weighted average of ownership, and often companies will do something called share days, which is kind of the calculated weighted average of your one person's ownership throughout the year. And then how do we allocate the income that's been being distributed for the company? Not to bore anyone too much, but this challenge was kind of ripe for AI to solve. But rather than go to a ChatGPT and say, "Hey, help us solve this," you have to figure out a framework to have it help you with that without giving it any data. And I'll just say one other thing about AI. I think it's probably best at crafting communications. So, if you're a shareholder administrator, if you are, even an executive at the company, and you want to figure out how to create really professionalized and understandable communications with shareholders, I think that's another area where AI can be super helpful.
That's an excellent point. So a question came in: at what point of complexity does a shareholder management platform make sense? How many shareholders? What are you seeing there?
I would say, 30 or more shareholders, something like that. We've seen companies that can get by, up to 50 or more. But yeah, I think so. Number of shareholders is one, but also number of entities. We've seen companies, there's a parent company and then there's 7 subsidiaries, and it's not like there's a single cap table for the whole family, across all of those entities. There's, some family members invested in this, new project, and so therefore there's a totally separate list of owners for this subsidiary. That can kind of have a multiplying effect on the, on the complexity. There might have a smaller number of shareholders, but just, because there's 7 entities, it's complex.
Yeah, or let's say you have 25 K1s or 50 or 100 K1s.
Exactly.
5, or not necessarily K1s, LLCs out there that are operating. It could be 5 shareholders, right? We own 25 apartment buildings. Just zone. Okay, well, great. This has been a really excellent conversation. We're at the bottom of the hour, at the bottom of the half hour here. Any final thoughts, Graham?
Well, I would say, hopefully you know where to find us. We always love chatting with family businesses, no matter where they are in their journey. That's actually where we're so customer driven, and we kind of define our roadmap based on conversations that we have with families. So, I encourage you to reach out if you're kind of thinking about a digital transformation. Please reach out.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Graham. I'm going to just note at the end of this, first of all, thank you all so much for joining us at this session. And we certainly wish you well this weekend. If you want to explore topics related to family dynamics, including dividend strategies, which can create some real dynamics, consider joining us at Transitions Fall. It's in early November in San Diego, California. You can scan this QR code to get more information. But in the meantime, I wish all of you a wonderful weekend, and we'll look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. Thank you so much.